Welcome to this week's Midweek meditation. Do you ever find it difficult to make a decision? These days we are surrounded by so many choices that it can sometimes be overwhelming. Walk into any large supermarket and it's all there. Even straightforward things like milk have become complicated. Full cream, skimmed, semi-skimmed, oat milk, soya milk. The list seems to grow longer every day. People of my generation can remember when we only had 2 channels on the TV, and the arrival of BBC Two seemed like an exciting event, whereas now even Freeview has quite a few channels, and once you start adding subscription services like Netflix, it becomes increasingly complicated. Have you ever been sat with friends or family when someone says, "Let's watch a film"? So you grab the remote and start trawling through all the possibilities. By the time you finally settle on something, it's usually half an hour later, and most of the group have lost interest. So although choice can be great, it can also be very confusing. It probably doesn't matter too much if we settle down to watch the latest action movie or Home Alone for the millionth time. But what about the bigger, important choices? Should I change my job? Should I move house? Should I get involved with a project at church or in the community? The good news is that God is interested in our choices and will help us to make the right ones. This is what it says in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Never rely on what you think you know. Remember the Lord in everything you do, and He will show you the right way. Let's look at those verses more closely. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Who do you trust the most? Maybe your mum, your partner, or a friend. The good news is that God is 100% trustworthy, and although we don't always understand why He does things at the time, when we look back, we realize that He always has our best interests at heart. We need to pray and believe that. Never rely on what you think you know. I think this particularly relates to people who have a tendency to rush into things and as a result sometimes make some very bad decisions. It's a reminder to stop for a minute and do the next thing in the verse, which is, remember the Lord in everything you do. God is interested in everything about us. Anything that is important to us is important to Him, and we can ask His advice. It might be something quite small, but nothing is too trivial for us to share with Him. And He will show you the right way. Now we get to the tricky bit. How do we know that God is guiding us? Paul had a literally blinding vision on the Damascus road, and Mary and Joseph had visits from angels. But for most of us, most of the time, it isn't as spectacular as that. Apologies in advance for those who've heard this joke before, but it carries an important message. A man is out walking one day when he gets too close to the cliff's edge. He slips and falls, but about halfway down he manages to grab hold of a jutting out piece of rock and hang on. It's a pretty desperate situation, so the man prays and asks God to rescue him. Within a few minutes, a couple of ramblers come along, and they just happen to have some rope, so they shout to the man and offer to help. But he just shouts back, "No thank you, I'm waiting on God." They're a bit surprised, but carry on with their walk. Quite soon afterwards, some people in a boat called out to him, but the response was the same. "No thank you, I'm waiting on God." Then a helicopter arrived and tried to rescue him, but the man was adamant. "No thank you, I'm waiting on God." Finally, the man fell into the sea and died and went up to heaven. When he got there, he was very upset and said to God, "Why didn't you rescue me? I prayed and prayed, but you didn't help me." God paused for a moment and then replied, "That's funny. I sent some ramblers, a boat and a helicopter." It's a pretty silly story, but it has always stuck with me. It reminds us that God can use many different kinds of people and many different things to guide us and help us as we journey through life. And we should be on the lookout for them and not just dismiss things without praying about them. Some people wait and nothing seems to happen. But maybe they are like the man hanging on the cliff and are missing the messages that God is sending to them. It might be a verse from the Bible that seems to jump out at you, or something a friend says, or a nagging feeling inside that just won't go away. It's normally more than one thing, so that you can be sure you're getting it right. Frequently God speaks to us over a period of time, especially when it comes to the big life-changing decisions. If we keep praying, gradually things become clearer. But it's not always just about waiting. We can try pushing a few doors and see if they open. For instance, if you are thinking about changing your job, you can brush up your CV, send it off to a few places, and see what happens. It can be very frustrating when we pray and ask God to guide us and nothing much seems to happen. But He works on a different time scale to us. Maybe, for example, it's not time to move house just now, but will be next year. It's often only much later when we look back that we realise why things had to happen when they did. Above all, remember that however long it seems to take, God always answers our prayers. It's just that some of the answers come by rocket and others by tortoise. Have a good week.